Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. And here's our take on the weekly events from America, the UK and around the world. And this week we're going to focus on the State of the Union address. As the US economy recovers, President Obama bounces back and goes on the offensive.
The shadow of crisis has passed, and the State of the Union is strong.
As his approvals ratings rise, the president exuded confidence and defiance.
I have no more campaigns to run. My only agenda, I know because I won both of them.
He says it's not a partisan occasion. President Obama's vision for a United States where the rich are taxed heavily to help the less well-off, a foreign policy of diplomacy and building coalitions, and wiping out Islamic State terror will be a lasting legacy. Such was Barack Obama's penultimate State of the Union address. Well, as usual, the Democrat commentator Jeffrey Robinson is in New York and the Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams is in Washington. Gentlemen, a bit like a debate, I'm going to give you just a few seconds to give me your opening thoughts on this. Jeffrey, you go first.
He set the agenda for 2016, laid the foundation for Hillary Clinton. He put the Republicans on the back foot, took the offensive, and did it with great swagger. It was one of his better speeches of all times.
Armstrong?
You know, I agree that it's one of his better speeches of all times. I found it interesting that he said that women deserve the equal pay as men. There was a report in the Washington Post recently where women in the White House makes far less money than the men. And I think President Obama needs to look at his own house. And also in his State of the Union, he claimed that Obamacare had helped cut the deficit by, I think he said 2/3 by slowing the rate of healthcare spending growth. That is actually a false claim because the Obamacare has created a deficit time bomb that will explode just as he is leaving office. Now, it is true that growth of healthcare spending has fallen during his presidency.
OK, Armstrong, we'll come back to the healthcare issue, I'm sure. Joining us from Washington, though, is a former Democrat representative and former two-time Democrat presidential candidate, Dennis Kucinich. Dennis, thanks for being part of our programme today. What did you make of the speech?
Well, it would have been a great speech 6 years ago as an inaugural. It would have been great to issue a mandate for the Democratic Party to carry forth those policies when the Democratic Party indeed had control of both the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Unfortunately, when the president was in a position to do something about those issues, he did not do that. And as a result, since 2008, 95% of the income gains in the economy have gone to the top 1%. The Democratic Party is in tatters. And what we saw yesterday was rhetoric to try to set the stage for 2016, but it's like giving people a picture of a carrot when Wall Street got the whole carrot patch.
Let's bring in Jeffrey and Armstrong if we can. Jeffrey, Dennis seems to be saying to us that the president might have saved the country and put it on the right path, but he's messed up, if not ruined, the Democrat Party.
No, I'm not quite in agreement with my friend Dennis. No. You have to remember that the people who stopped him from doing anything once he lost the House were the Republicans. They vetoed everything. They were against absolutely everything he wanted to do. So the Republicans haven't been playing ball, and the Republicans, I think, are largely responsible for all the damage that's been done in the past 6 years to the programs he wanted to get through. The fact is, he's very defiant now. He has nothing to lose, and he's going to push it down the throats of the Republicans. One of the things that really interested me last night in watching both sides of the House, unlike previous years when the Republicans sat on their hands for everything, this time there were a few people, not many, but still a few Republicans who actually applauded some of the things like equal pay for women. There are fissures in the Republican Party. John Boehner is not leading a united House. There's the crazies, the lunatic fringe in the Tea Party, but there are also some moderate Republicans who may very well start pushing an agenda that is a lot more palatable to the American people than the usual Republican do-nothing, veto the president agenda.
Armstrong, do you think, as Dennis says, that if he pushed this middle-of-the-road, middle-class economics agenda a few years ago, he would have got some across-the-aisle agreement?
You know, I have to tell you, much respect for former Congressman Kucinich for being honest and really showing integrity on today's broadcast. Because listen, he's a former House member. He dealt with these issues. He knows the games that are played. And what he said really resonated with me on this level because he's right about this. In reality, not only are the nation's biggest banks bigger than ever, thanks in no part to Obama's Dodd-Frank laws, but consumers have seen almost none of the financial relief that was promised. And during the peak of the crisis, Obama actually used middle-class homeowners to prop up Wall Street banks. So Kucinich is right. And while they have announced all these multi-billion-dollar settlements with J.P. Morgan and Bank of America for their actions before and during the financial crisis, the dollar amounts of these settlements have actually been greatly inflated. Now, look, obviously, I could resonate with the president's speech because for many people, it really doesn't matter who's in the White House. It's not going to really impact their economy. But for the middle class is going to shrink. The poor will get poorer. And Kucinich is absolutely right. If the president really wanted to make real change, he should have done this early on. You know, and look, I am someone who's conservative, but I think sometimes, as Kucinich is pointing out, you need to point out the truth. And you need to tell it like it is. And instead of paring back government programs like the FDIC that allow these big banks to only get bigger, he's chosen to try and micromanage those banks with government bureaucrats. And it is only a matter of time, guys, and Kucinich can understand this, before the banks pay millions to these outsmart their bureaucrats, overseas managed, to get a tax bailout. Again, that's all they're looking for is more of a tax bailout on the backs of the middle class and the poor that the president advocates that he's trying to help.
Okay,
it's absolutely correct.
Let's just drill down into one of the campaigns. Let me bring in Dennis Kucinich again on this. One of the talking points he raised, one of the issues he raised was community college. He said, let's try and get everyone's post-16 education up a whole notch, and free community college would be President Obama's way of doing that. Is there any chance he can get cross-party support for that?
Well, I think Democrats would certainly support that. However, you have to look at where the money's going in the budget. You know, it's all well and good to advocate free college. I'm for it. Actually, I'm for free college at the university level in every public college in the country. However, where's the money going to come from? The president has, throughout his term, prosecuted wars that will end up costing trillions of dollars, and he is still reaching forward with a foreign policy that's going to be very expensive, with America continuing to be the policeman of the world. So I think that, well, we can go through a wish list of things that that Democrats may agree on. You know, the president's pushing these things out there, I think, to try to gain an advantage for Democrats in the 2016 election. But why should, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I say, why should people want to support Democrats if they didn't deliver when they were in power?
Sure, but
that's what it goes back to.
Okay, but hang on that foreign adventures bill, then, you say is now going to cost the American nation for the foreseeable future. What would you cut back? What would you trim of that part of the budget in order to do some of these domestic things?
Well, I don't think there's any purpose in this day and age in America having dozens, if not over 100 bases around the world. What's that about? We have this old thinking. We need to be strong as a nation. We need to have a strong defense. We need to be able to protect our country. But how do we protect our country? By having America, in a sense, be, establishing an imperium. I'm very concerned that we are losing our capacity to be able to take care of things here at home by getting our nose in everybody else's business, trying to be the policeman of the world, trying to pretend that our security as a nation is not in making sure that wages rise for everyone and everyone can have a roof over their head and everyone can have health care and education, but that we can be the biggest and toughest guy in the block. I don't know about that. I think the problem is no longer the threats from nation states, from non-state actors. We need to deal with them in a more efficient, effective way, and we haven't done that. And at this point, what we see coming out of the White House is really too late, not enough, and where we need the United States to be present on the world stage to assert itself diplomatically, we remove ourselves, and instead we substitute military force for diplomacy.
Sure, but I mean,
that doesn't work.
Let me flip it back to Jeffrey, if I may. But on the foreign policy issue, Jeffrey, if you could just address that if you could. I mean, if it is going to be Hillary Clinton, she at least should know what she's talking about if she has some fresh thoughts on where America's status in the world is.
Hillary is to the right of Barack Obama when it comes to foreign policy and the use of the military. She's much more hawkish than he is. Now, Dennis, you've just heard why for 8 terms in Congress, Dennis was a big star. I mean, he's wonderful. And you can argue with many of the things he says, but he's one of the few people on either side who actually supports what he says with some fact. And I'm a big Dennis fan. The fact is, however, it's not too little too late. It's better late than never. He is laying the groundwork for 2016. He is thinking long term, and there will be a solution to ISIS because even the Republicans will get behind the president on this, and we will figure out a way to wipe them out. I mean, we have the military strength to do that, and we have the allies who want to do that. I don't think the conclusion is anything but already drawn that ISIS will disappear. There will be somebody else. There'll be Boko Haram. There'll be somebody else that takes its place. But that's the nature of politics in certain parts of the world. As for community college, it's very simple how to pay for it. You take the Bush tax cuts for the rich and you roll them back. And you get the Koch brothers to pay their fair share. And that will go a long way into helping educate the American school children, who, by the way, are victims of the Republican plan to do away with the Department of Education. I mean, the insanity on the side of the Republicans is mind-boggling.
OK, Jeffrey, let me just stay in the security groove, if I can, with another question for Dennis here. Dennis Kucinich, the President referred to cybercrime. We've all got in our minds over the Christmas time, we had the whole Sony pictures going on. That is a real issue for most nations around the world, and perhaps particularly America, isn't it?
Certainly, we want our government, our businesses, and ourselves to be free from hackers. I would submit to you that the greater threat in the United States is a national security agency which has the ability to reach very deeply into people's private lives, to gather data, to store it from computers, from telephones and text messages, and essentially has created a shift in our democracy away from a constitutionally based principle of the Fourth Amendment, which relates to being free from unreasonable search and seizure. Yes, we do need protection from hackers. Every business works to achieve that. The government has hundreds of people on staff who are very skilled who work to achieve that. Hacking is bound to be an ongoing problem that needs to be addressed. But I will tell you that the greater problem in the United States is the fact that our Constitution has experienced a destructive undermining in this administration by the overreach of the National Security Agency. We don't need a big brother looking over our shoulders, inquiring into every keystroke that that any American may make. And I will continue to challenge the logic that came out of the so-called Patriot Act, which government officials have used to continue to reach very deeply into people's private lives.
Dennis Kucinich, thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, Andrew Mitchell is Vice Chairman of the influential British-American Parliamentary Group, and he joins us now. Mr. Mitchell, you no doubt heard the State of the Union address from the President. Is it the case that when America's doing well, the rest of the world can hope to follow in her wake?
Well, we certainly have a huge interest in America doing well. And I think one of the things that came out of the speech was the fact that the American economy and the British economy are on the up. There's been this very successful visit by our Prime Minister to America last week. And on the economy, there's no doubt at all that we are both beginning to prosper. And one of the things that unites nearly all the political parties in Britain is the enthusiasm for developing the free trade agenda between America and Europe. So that's part of our economic future, and we very much hope that that will get a great deal of attention in due course across the Atlantic. The main part, of course, of the State of the Union speech that we watch with care is the approach by the American president to foreign affairs, these very big issues that disfigure our world at the moment. And there was quite a lot in the speech which will have lifted British hearts about what he said about the fight against ISIS, about what he said about Cuba, what he said about Guantanamo too, where the last British prisoner, Shaka Amir, was on the agenda between President Obama and David Cameron, and where I believe the president said that he would do what he could to advance that agenda. But in terms of foreign policy and foreign affairs, we worry in Britain that some of the focus has moved towards the Pacific. We obviously are very keen to ensure that American leadership, without which little will be possible, especially on the Middle East and Syria and Iraq, continues to be an important feature on the American political scene. And I was struck by what Dennis said about the importance of the diplomatic effort by America on resolving some of these very difficult disputes.
Let me go to Armstrong Williams with the question the President raised about minimum wage. He was saying, come on, let's sort it out across the nation. And the idea, which is a bit alien to people in the UK, that nobody gets paid for sick days. Now, is that something that is a relatively simple fix, Armstrong?
Well, you know what? Listen, I don't know which America sometimes that we're speaking about, because, listen, most corporations and CEOs that I know, that when workers have built-in sick days, which could be 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how long they have been with the company. Obviously, it may be a different situation with the government workers, but in the private sector, the sick leave issue is not an issue. Also, when you talk about the issue of minimum wage, and I can speak as a CEO, oftentimes the minimum wage, especially when you talk about small businesses that have 10 or less employees, a lot of these companies are not doing as well as these larger corporations or these mid-sized corporations who are really benefiting from the economy, and they're still struggling. And when you're talking about raising minimum wage, they have to make a decision of whether they're going to grow their business or add new employees. And sometimes what they do, they don't add employees, and sometimes they cut employees. And also for a lot of these businesses, minimum wages also make people realize that there are a lot of people who cannot find jobs. So some may have degrees from Harvard or Ivy League schools, have a heavy science and master's degree, and they're seeking these jobs that pay $10 and $12 an hour. And what happens, the minimum wage job doesn't give a lot of these kids the opportunity who don't have the skills and who've not really been in the workforce to take advantage of it. And what it allows, if you leave the minimum wage at a minimum, it allows them to come in and gain the experience. It's not always about the money. It's about gaining experience, networking, building skills, and building relationships so you can move on. And the other point about the economy, it is true. There are a lot of us. I can speak personally. We've had a tremendous year in terms of our economy, but I can tell you a lot of small businesses who are not doing well at all. And there are a lot of Americans who are not doing well in this economy. And it's right. If you're already doing well, you have a system in place, and you're running businesses that not really depend on the government and a lot of government policies, you're going to do well. But the problem is that a lot of people, because of this economy and because that is still sluggish, they're still suffering. People cannot find jobs. They cannot find opportunities. And while I embrace much of what the president has said, there's still a class of people that can't even relate to what he's saying about the drastic improvement he's talking about. In fact, many of them think that he's talking about some country they're unaware of.
Jeffrey Robinson, does that mean, if Armstrong's right, that actually the conversation over the next 2 years, right through whatever pans out with the presidential race, is it's still the economy stupid, is the #1 topic of conversation.
It's always the economy, but Armstrong is not right. So there's no if. Armstrong is completely, totally, absolutely, and conclusively wrong, because all of the evidence points to the fact that where there is minimum wage on the state level, for instance, $10 and something, I think 10.10, and some places up to 15, the economy prospers. People do better, and employment does not suffer. It increases. I mean, all the evidence absolutely proves Armstrong very, very wrong. Will this be an issue? Will the Republicans raise the minimum wage? It is actually possible that they might. I mean, one of the things we haven't discussed is the ace in the hole that the president has got in his hand, and that's the pipeline. And he has said repeatedly that he would veto the pipeline until he's got the evidence that it will not be dangerous, that it will work, and I think he's holding it as a card to play for some of these programs like minimum wage. He puts a whole package together and then says to the Republicans, put the pipeline in there and I'll approve it. And they will go for it.
That kind of infrastructure investment, Andrew Mitchell, is that something you'd relate to? I mean, I suppose we've got our high-speed railway discussion going on in the UK right now.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the points that have been raised by your two commentators are points that resonate with Britain. You know, we have the same debate here about the minimum wage, where the Conservative Party, my party, has been pretty strongly in favour, if possible, of increasing it, because we're conscious that people have suffered greatly from the recession that we have been through. But the main focus in Britain, when we listen to the President give his State of the Union, the commentators today in Britain on that speech have been on the international affairs and what American leadership is going to do to combat the awful crisis in Syria, Iraq, and more widely in the Middle East and Northern Africa as well. Because American leadership is something which we rely on so strongly, and as a faithful and good partner of America on these issues of world concern, we look to America for strong leadership, strong diplomatic and military leadership in trying to address and resolve these very, very difficult issues.
Could I just ask you guys for a quick thought? And it's this, about the very process of politics. I remember before he was President Obama, Mr. Obama campaigned about the dysfunctionality of Washington, how the two-party system, where everybody had to disagree with everybody else, didn't actually serve the American people very well. As we are reaching the twilight of his presidency, do you think he had a point, Jeffrey?
Absolutely, he had a point. I mean, he even said so last night. He said, we can do better if we set politics aside. And let me just say to Andrew's point, he's absolutely right. The special relationship is vital to world security. It is vital to the economic prosperity of England and the United States. I think it is alive and well, and I say long may it wave.
Armstrong, on the question of politics, does Washington serve the rest of America well?
They serve themselves well. And while the president has the right rhetoric that no one could really disagree with, his action says something totally different. He's setting up the dynamics for the fight on immigration. He's setting up the dynamics for the fight on the Keystone and other issues that he's going to have to confront a Republican-controlled Congress, because it's the first time in his administration that he's ever had a State of the Union where both parties were dominated by Republicans. And he knows that he's going to make the American people believe in his rhetoric, that he wants to work with them, he wants them to cooperate. But the problem is the president wants the Republicans to cooperate with them. He doesn't want to meet them halfway, and that's what that is about. And because John Boehner, as much as he's criticized by Jeffrey, I don't know any other speaker that has reached across the aisle. Anybody else in the party have reached out and tried to work with this president on a consistent basis to get things done.
Jeffrey, you don't agree. You can't see him, Armstrong, but he is shaking his head. He's almost crying. He's weeping.
I mean, of course I am. It does not relate to reality.
He should be, because he should be ashamed of some of the things that he said today. But I'm going to leave that alone because he's my brother and I respect him. And I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. Look, that is nothing but hogwash that the president talked about in terms of leaving your interests aside and how people are going to think about it in your constituency if you vote this way. If only that were true and he was a part of the solution, and he's not. He's part of the problem.
OK, Armstrong, Jeffrey, thank you. Let me give a final word here to Andrew on this question of whether these slightly messy political democracies we have, both sides of the Atlantic, do they serve the people well? Just a few thoughts.
Well, we've seen, of course, the breakdown after a very long time of the two-party dominance in government, with the government that's in power in Britain at the moment, where we have a coalition. The first time in peacetime we've had a coalition since 1931. And I think, actually, the public like it more than the politicians do. The dominance in British politics of the two major parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, is at an all-time low, with other parties now occupying the political space in quite considerable numbers. And if you look at some of the polling in Britain, I don't know what the result of this election is going to be, but there's a powerful group of polling opinion which suggests that the next government could involve not two coalition partners, but three or more.
Andrew Mitchell, Jeffrey Robinson, Armstrong Williams, thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this edition of The Debate. Until next time, goodbye.